Greetings, this is another reader. Welcome back to my channel. It's time for a monthly wrap. Well, I try to do a wrap-up video each month, but I am a slow reader. Here are all the books that I read between March and April. So without further ado, let's get started. The first book that I want to show you is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, Part 2, Either Or. This book didn't take a lot of time to read. I read it in 10 days. What can I say about this book? I have come to one conclusion. Do not be afraid of reading books that have values that you reject. Do not fear books that you might disagree with. From the early pages of this book, it is obvious what is valued and what is devalued. How can I describe the plot of this book? Well, it's kinda hard for me to explain the plot of this book. I will describe it like this. The collective slowly starts taking over the individual. It doesn't happen right away, but the process begins. And Dagny Tugger does everything to resist this. In this book there were two characters I absolutely hated, even though the actions were kinda justified. I hated Lillian. Granted, she wanted her husband to pay attention to her, however, she is more obsessed with her status as his wife. She is so obsessed with her status, she is ready to do anything to preserve it. And I hated James. Once Dagny left, spoiler alert, he showed what he is truly like. I think Ayn Rand had her own vision of the world, and she wanted to show how things would turn out if they deviate from her vision. Well, at least that's my opinion. I'm not going to debate on this. I read this book 7 out of 10. Some moments of the book were bland and grey, and to be honest, I did not remember the majority of the book afterwards, but in overall, it was kinda good. To be continued. I finally read my Hungarian trophy, and then there were none by Agatha Christie. I wanted to reread this book in Russian. I did not plan to buy the English version, but then I went to a bookstore in Budapest. I saw this, and I knew I had to have it. I remember that I paid 4,000 forints for this. Was it worth it? Well, not as much as I thought. Probably an unpopular opinion, but I have to say, the Russian translation was better than the English original. Well, at least for me, it was more interesting to read Agatha Christie in Russian. To be honest, I am kinda picky with which books I read in Russian and which I can read in English. Tolkien, English only. I have made a video about it. Wheel of Time and Stormlight Archive, all Russian. Agatha Christie books, also in Russian. Okay, let's move on to the plot. The plot revolves around 10 people who are invited to a mysterious island. They do not know each other. They have different personalities, different perspectives, different views. However, there's something that unites all 10 of them. As the story progresses, they die one by one. This is not a spoiler, this is literally the plot of the book. The book is quite thrilling and it focuses on all characters' memories. While some characters receive more time than the others, one issue I have with the story is Emily Brent. Unfortunately, there are going to be spoilers. If you have already read the book or seen some of the adaptations, or you don't particularly care about spoilers, you are free to stay. For those of you who haven't read the book and don't want spoilers, I offer you to skip the warning. Spoilers ahead. Emily Brent gets on the island because of her servant Beatrice Taylor. Beatrice is said to be from a very religious family and Emily is fond of them. However, Emily herself is a very religious woman. She is obsessed with purity and she fires Beatrice when she gets pregnant out of wedlock. Afterwards, Beatrice takes her own life. And this is why Emily ends up on the island. When I reread this book, I thought, why Beatrice's parents weren't on the island? They deserve it much more than Emily. because they turned away from Beatrice when she needed their help. Yes, I don't think that Emily truly belongs on the island. Well, at least not as much as Beatrice's parents. Here's my version. How to make Emily's presence on the island more relevant. Here's my version. Well, let's imagine that Beatrice is an orphan and Emily is her religious aunt. Emily is literally Margaret White before Margaret White was written. Well, aka she abuses Beatrice because of her religious beliefs. Beatrice, she goes wild. Beatrice disowns her. Yes, you got it. If Emily was Beatrice's only relative that turned away from young Beatrice for getting pregnant out of wedlock, then Emily's presence on the island would have been justified. Spoilers ended. I found Vera Claythorne's story the most interesting of all. However, I did find a small, well, how to say it, fanfiction, or that is actually an alternative interpretation of the story. Well, Vera's story is told quite clear in the novel, but the fanfiction interprets her story differently. I'm not going to spoil that one. I rate this 9 out of 10. Emily's story would have been much more convincing. It's a very thrilling book, and it doesn't let you go until it finishes. Oh, and by the way, I was reading this book when I received that call from Tarja. It isn't actually the first time that she interrupted my reading with her live chats. I'm not a fan of her, yet whenever she starts a live chat, I watch her live chats. I don't know why. The next book is the perfect candidate for the Book of the Year award. The Neverending Story by Mihailande. I have already made a video on why it's worth reading, therefore I won't be saying too much about this book. However, there's one aspect that I want to discuss that I haven't mentioned in that video. It's less about the story itself and it's more a commentary in general. In the book it is said that Bastian hates when the books dictate something on him. I know that I don't translate it very well, but the whole point here is that Bastian hates when the book forces something on him. And I can understand that. I found an accurate representation of myself. I say this because it's so relatable. Writers should respect the readers and allow them to enjoy the story and make their own mind. The Neverending Story gives the reader such opportunity. Also, I want to say that the Neverending Story sparked my interest in German fantasy writers. And is not my first German fantasy writer. The first was Walter Moyers. However, after reading Moyers and reading Ende, it seems to me that the German authors are more flexible and more subtle compared to the British and American authors. I don't know, maybe that's my bias, maybe I'm wrong. I think the next German fantasy author I want to discover is Cornelia Funke. Back in 2006 I had her book The Thief Lord. I tried reading it, but I failed. Just like I failed to learn her language. But back then I didn't know she was German. The reason I bought her book was that she shared the name with one of the witches. Yes, there was this very popular animated show called Witch, and the name of one of the characters was Cornelia. I rate this masterpiece 10 out of 10, if not 11 out of 10, because it's so amazing. If you haven't read it, or if you know the story from the film, you have an interesting journey ahead. For a proper review, check out my video on The Neverending Story, named Why It's Worth Reading, The Neverending Story. I am tired of showing this big book in my videos, because I've done it so many times. A few weeks ago, I came out of the bathroom and suddenly I realized that I was ready to go back to the world of Dune. and I started reading Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah is a short book. It's much shorter compared to the first book, and I read it quite quickly. Dune Messiah opens with a plot against Paul Atreides, and it promises us something interesting. However, things didn't turn out as I had expected. Speaking of Paul, I've heard people say that in the first book he's kinda boring and uninteresting. I disagree with that. Sure, in the first book Paul may seem a little bit bland, but however, his age and his status as the chosen one gives him the charm he needs. In Dune Messiah, however, this is completely gone. Paul is the most boring character in the book. Anyone is more interesting than him. This ruined the book for me, but luckily there are other storylines. Well, one of the criticisms of the Dune film was that they thought that the lead actor was boring. However, given the description of Paul, I think the casting choice was done right. Not saying that he's a bad actor, not at all. It's just his character that isn't written very well. At least in the second book, definitely. There is a lot of focus on Alia, Paul's younger sister. And she seemed to be quite appealing character for me, although I felt sorry for her because of her birth circumstances. She is hated everywhere. I hope she plays a bigger role in the next books. And there are hints at... I'm not going to say it. First of all, it's a spoiler, and second, that's too disgusting to discuss. Unfortunately, Dune Messiah did not excite me as much as Dune did. The first book had lots of dynamics, and each character had their own point of view, and it made it interesting to read. Dune Messiah, on the other hand, was kinda okay. Not saying that it's bad, it's higher than average, but still okayish. You know, Dune and Wheel of Time were together for me in my videos and alongside my book purchases. Dune and Wheel of Time, Dune and Wheel of Time. Now that I have read the first two books in both series, I can say that I'm more hyped for Wheel of Time. I can say that The Great Hunt is one of the best books I read this year, and Dune Messiah, not so much. I think this book was too fast and it lacked depth. But speaking of film adaptations, Dune definitely wins over Wheel of Time. I rate this book 6.5 out of 10. It could have been much better. I expected more from Dune Messiah. I hope Children of Dune is better. Alright, these are all the books that I have read. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment and follow me on social media. Link to my Linktree is down in the description. There is also a link to Amazon where you can buy my debut novel, Nightingale Divine. See you next time. Goodbye.